I want to begin by acknowledging that we have done a lot of emotional and spiritual work together this morning. We have looked back on a difficult year that has passed and asked hard questions of ourselves, reflecting on who and how we want to be in the year ahead. We have acknowledged the part that each one of us plays in the illusion of separateness during this time of separation, separateness from those we love, from those who may think or believe or act differently from us. We have forgiven ourselves and each other for being silent and self-involved during a time when we felt powerless and lonely. As Unitarian Universalists, we do not often share words like the ones that we have said and sung together this morning. We may have felt vulnerable and maybe even a little defensive, if we're honest, during some of the prayers and responsive readings. I know that every time I revisit the Litany of Atonement that we shared part of this morning with Don singing, and I had such a joy singing with him this morning. I miss singing so much. But every time I visit that Litany of Atonement, I tend to distance myself from it. In my head, I'm thinking, well, I can say this, but I'm not really selfish. I'm not really angry. I'm not really afraid. Why should I need to forgive myself for such things? Or even worse, why should I need to seek forgiveness from another person? Or possibly even worse still, why should I need to seek ultimate forgiveness from the divine or God? Now, Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Rob Eller Isaac, says that when he originally wrote this responsive reading, he meant for it to be shared in pairs or in small groups. The response was not actually meant to be plural, but singular. I forgive myself. I forgive you. We begin again in love. And the way that Rob tells the story is that the editors of our hymnal thought that that phrasing was too personal. It was too intimate for Unitarian Universalists. And so they depersonalized it, made it collective, and had us say, we. But there is such value in the way that Rob first wrote it. Because when was the last time that you offered yourself forgiveness? I mean, actively acknowledged your shortcomings. We all have them. It is part of what makes us human. Actively acknowledged your shortcomings, not with harsh judgment or critique, but with gentleness and compassion. When was the last time you said, I forgive myself? And when was the last time that you offered warm-hearted forgiveness and care to another person? Perhaps in person, but perhaps also in your mind's eye. And this, again, I mean actively, intentionally calling someone to mind. Perhaps someone you love. Perhaps an acquaintance or someone you know tangentially. Perhaps even someone who is challenging for you, whom you may be in conflict with. What would it be like to call them to mind and to say directly, I forgive you? Each day when we wake, we begin again. And as we reflect now during this most sacred time in the Jewish calendar, these days of awe between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, let us think about what it means or what it would mean to begin again each day, not in resentment or bitterness, not in hatred or fear, but in love, in profound love for others, for this life that we share, for our deeply interconnected world, and yes, for ourselves. I wonder what is required for you to wake each morning with a promise to make a difference. Resolving to make a difference for others might even come easier for some of us than it does to offer some kindness and care to ourselves. The truth is that beginning again in love is not easy. It requires deep spiritual and emotional labor, and it requires practice. We have to begin again in love again and again and again. And so what might it look like to adopt that phrase? I forgive myself. I forgive others. I begin again in love, perhaps even as a daily mantra that we could start the day with. How might a week of that practice change your relationships with yourself, with others? For the past 2 years, as a part of my training as a chaplain at Emory University, I have been learning a meditation practice grounded in the idea that when we accept our own limitations with compassion and kindness, we can offer deeper and more sustained compassion to others. Cognitive-based compassion training is CBCT for short, and it's an 8-session secular compassion meditation course that's been developed at Emory over the past 15 years. CBCT melds the ancient Tibetan practice of lojong, or mind training, with the insights of modern scientific research on brain plasticity and compassion. And so practitioners do very similar work to what Esperanza did in our story. We reflect on the natural state of our mind. We notice our self-talk. We work to undo those harmful patterns of thought. We focus first on self-compassion and then on widening our circle of concern. Doing that through the idea of connecting with people's desire for happiness and well-being, something that we all share. And finally, holding all of these reflections, we turn our attention to the cultivation of an engaged, sustained compassion for other people and other beings in our world. And I have to tell you, CBCT has literally changed my life, and I am so excited in this next phase of my work to bring this practice to my Unitarian Universalist community. We are working with leadership here at UUCA to offer our first CBCT course this spring, and I cannot wait. I believe so strongly in the power of compassion and in the power of this analytical meditation to help us deepen and sustain our care for others, because I have seen it work in the most challenging of times. Little did my chaplain colleagues and I know in the fall of 2019, when we began our compassion training, that we would depend upon it so profoundly to care for patients and healthcare workers through a pandemic. The Dalai Lama says that compassion might well be the antidote to much of what ails our bruised and battered world. He is careful not to call compassion a panacea, but an avenue for connection, an avenue for care and solidarity and understanding that is so sorely lacking in our human relationships and leading to so much suffering and conflict in our world. Now, his work on compassion is more than just wishful thinking. Science has shown that our brains do indeed have remarkable abilities to grow and change, even around something we might think of as fixed, like compassion. You either care or you don't, right? But what the studies have shown is that through reflection and practice, we can actually deliberately increase our capacity to care for ourselves first, for our loved ones, for strangers, and even for those we might consider adversaries. We know that, as Gandhi said, and as was sung so beautifully here this morning, we must be the change that we wish to see in the world. We start with ourselves, and compassion is no different. Compassion that is needed on a global scale begins with each one of us. And compassion for others begins as we learn to offer kindness and care to ourselves. Because it's only when we are able to do that we can spread that care to others. Each time we offer compassion to another, it ripples out into the world in ways that are difficult to measure. I'll give you an example. In late July, my husband Anthony and our elder daughter suited up in face shields and heavy-duty masks, and they took their first and perhaps only plane trip in a year and a half to visit friends and family in the Northeast. And in the store near their gate at the airport, they stood 6 feet behind a boy of about 10 or so who waited patiently in line with an armful of snacks and a handful of dollar bills with which to pay for them. And when it was the little boy's turn, though, the clerk informed him that cash was no longer accepted and it was cards only. And he did as little kids do when they're told something like that and kind of panicked a little bit. And Anthony stepped in and he paid for the snacks. Afterwards, the little boy offered him the bills that he was carrying. And Anthony told him he was glad to help and that he should keep the money. Little did my spouse know that just a few weeks later, he would be on the other end of a similar act of kindness. Because shortly after they returned home, Anthony went to the grocery store, which is a rare event in our household these days, and he was so out of practice that he left his wallet at home. He didn't realize it was missing until he was standing in the checkout line with a cart full of groceries and no way to pay for them. Now, Anthony can talk anyone into almost anything, but the first folks that he asked if they would be willing to pay for his groceries, if he sent them the money to them electronically right then, they looked at him like he had two heads and walked away. The second person he asked, though, much to his relief, said yes. So the clerk rang up the food and they chatted a little bit, and Anthony shared the story of the boy in the airport. And when he took out his phone to send her the money a few minutes later, she stopped him. "Just pay it forward," she said. He was incredulous and insistent it was a lot of groceries. It was hundreds of dollars worth of groceries. But she was firm. "I would prefer," she said, "that you pay it forward." Anthony nodded and he put his phone away and he accepted her kindness. "I will," he said. And he came home and he related that story to me with tears in his eyes. He said, "There is still goodness in the world." So our family has talked at length about how we will pay forward the woman's kindness. We decided to put the same dollar amount of groceries in the free food fridges that are spread across Metro Atlanta. These are refrigerators set up at various locations where anyone can donate food and anyone can take what they need. The compassion of the stranger in the grocery line will ripple into our community in ways that she and we will never know. What motivated her to offer such generosity and kindness to a stranger? Perhaps she was touched by the story of Anthony's kindness to the little boy in the airport. Clearly, she had the financial means to help, but I wonder if a deeper motivation came because someone had once offered her compassion in a similar way. Science tells us that we are more likely to help another person when we ourselves feel safe and cared for. For this reason, CBCT compassion training begins with a meditation during which we call to mind what we call a moment of nurturance, a moment when we felt cared for and loved, when we were the recipient of compassion and kindness. Dr. Philip Shaver has shown in his social psychology research that people who are called what's called security primed are more likely to offer help to a stranger in distress. In the laboratory, these folks are asked to call to mind that moment of nurturance, to call to mind a person or people in their life with whom they felt safe and cared for. And other test subjects, the control group, are asked to just simply read out a list of neutral words. And then later, when each group is presented with the opportunity to help someone in need, it's the folks who had envisioned someone who made them feel nurtured, who are more likely to take action to stop another person's suffering. I invite you to reflect on this phenomenon in your own life. When are you more likely to respond to a request for help? Not necessarily financially, just a general request for help. When are you more likely to respond with a yes? I would venture to guess that it is when you feel safe and secure, when you feel that your emotional needs are met, when your proverbial well is full. When we feel this way, we are able and even eager to help another person in need, be that a home-cooked meal or a listening ear or something else entirely. And according to neuroscientific research, this makes perfect sense because studies show that when we call to mind the details of a time when we previously felt nurtured, we can reactivate those feelings in the present moment. We can help ourselves feel more secure now by calling to mind a moment when we felt that way in the past. This increases our resilience, and it enables us to care for others without depleting our own emotional reserves. We can add to this practice, we can further increase our resilience and our capacity to help others if, like Esperanza in the story, if we catch ourselves when we are not being a friend to ourselves, and instead forgive ourselves our shortcomings. Forgive ourselves the inevitable mistakes we've made and begin to replace self-critique with self-compassion. And when we do that work, in a community of care and support and love, when we do that work together, what we find might surprise us. Because, as the Dalai Lama says, it is through giving warmth and affection, through being genuinely concerned for others, through compassion, that the caregiver gains the conditions for genuine happiness. If you want others to be happy, he says, practice compassion. And if you want to be happy, he continues, practice compassion. Compassion, he has also said, is a marvel of human nature, a precious inner resource, and the foundation of our well-being and the harmony of our societies. And importantly, especially importantly for our time, he defines compassion here as distinct from empathy or sympathy. That idea of feeling another's pain, feeling another's suffering as if it were our own, or feeling badly about another's distress, but without any real motivation to alleviate it. Those are different than this kind of compassion that we're talking about today. Sometimes, often now, we talk about burnout or compassion fatigue among caregivers, or simply among those of us who are sensitive people, attuning easily to the distress of others. But in reality, burnout is much more connected to empathy fatigue than compassion fatigue. When we feel another's heartbreak without tapping into our own resources for well-being, we can find it challenging to offer care and concern to anyone for very long at all. So let us hold that distinction in mind, especially at this time when so many are in need of our care and compassion. The next time you find yourself in a situation that requires you to offer care to another, I invite you to pause for a moment, to first try recalling a time when someone or something offered you kindness. It can be a simple moment, someone holding a door open for you, or sending a sweet text or card, or perhaps a loving memory of a pet or a friend or a family member. See if just spending a moment reflecting on those feelings of warmth and connection might not help you offer a deeper compassion to someone else. And I also invite you to continue the work of sustaining your own practice of self-compassion. As we engage this turning of the year, reflecting on what has been and how we have been in these ridiculously challenging times. Let us practice, even just for the week ahead, setting an intention each morning to begin with kindness for the person in the mirror. Let's start there. When we begin this way, we can deepen and expand our practice of compassion, sending ripples of care out into our hurting world, and we can truly make a difference. There is still goodness in the world, my friends. May we be agents of that goodness. May we begin again in love and access abundant compassion for ourselves and others, and for a world that is so profoundly in need of our care. May it be so, and amen.
A huge thanks to Reverend Megan Lloyd Joyner. Always a